welcome to our very first episode.
Yay!
We're very excited about our new podcast, Teacher Talks to Go.
Yeah, so we came up with this idea. We've done Teacher Talks for, quite a number of years.
A long time.
Yes, and they were successful, but we just wanted to kind of do something different. We know you all have a lot of professional development in your schools, and so we love a good podcast.
We really do.
Yeah, listening to them in the car. And so we thought this might be a good spot if you're driving home or going out for a walk or just wherever you are that you can come join us and we can talk school for a little bit.
Yeah, and you got to tell the truth, Jessica. I mean, when we were doing Teacher Talks, they were driving all over creation.
Yeah.
Ordering at drive-thrus.
Which we understand because we're all so busy. So.
I like a good Baja Blast.
Yeah. So we wanted you to be safe, so we thought you could listen.
This is safer.
That's right. You can listen and hopefully get a little inspiration. So today, our very first episode, we thought it would be good to start out with just reflecting on our first year of teaching because this is geared towards beginning teachers, but we hope it's a place for any teacher to come.
Yes, and we have to tell what we do real quick, if we have someone that doesn't know us already. And we are recruitment and retention coordinators for Harnett County Schools. Jessica and I both used to be regular classroom teachers, but now we coach teachers, mostly rookies.
Yes.
But we can help anyone.
That's right, during their first 3 years. My story is a little bit different than Greg's. I started out wanting to be a teacher, went to school to be a teacher, student taught, went to ECU, graduated, went the traditional route. And Greg?
I didn't want to be a teacher when I was younger. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I ended up with an English degree from North Carolina State University, and I came in through alternative licensure many years ago into an 8th grade ELA classroom. So my background is middle school.
And I'm elementary, so I've taught first, second, and third, and was an instructional coach at a K-2 school. But I think the cool thing about, even though our start was different, is that we really had some of the same celebrations and some of the same challenges.
And kids are kids wherever you go.
That's right.
So, everybody always thinks that it's the kids, that makes or breaks you. However, the chips fall, as I used to say, with your Power School. What's not Power School?
Power School Infinite Campus now. Yeah.
With your rosters. But kids are the same wherever you go, whatever town you're in. The kids are going to be kids. They're going to do what they can get away with.
Yes.
But I want to talk about Jessica's first year first.
Okay.
I want to know, because my first year was, I'm sure, super different. And you student taught.
I did. I student taught, and I had a wonderful supervising teacher in Farmville, North Carolina. And it was a great, great experience. And I think while it was so awesome, one of the things that was a challenge to me was I thought when I went into my classroom that it was going to magically be the same experience that I had in student teaching because I thought I was wonderful.
You are wonderful.
But I was a great student teacher. I was a teaching fellow. I had all these wonderful experiences, and I thought it was just going to be magic. I really had rose-colored glasses. And while I had a wonderful first year, I realized that there were many things that my supervising teacher did to make it, that she had to set up on the front end to make it successful, and I had to figure that out on my own.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I would say, I was just kind of thinking about this last night, and I don't know if you had this same experience, but it was like around October, and I was just feeling really like a little down, like everybody else on my team seemed to be thriving and just doing wonderful, and I just didn't feel like I was doing the best that I could be, and I found a buddy.
Mm-hmm.
She was on my team. I went to her. She had been teaching a while, but she was new to the school, and her name was Jerry Wynn. And I went over to her and I was like, "Hey, I was just needing a little help with lesson planning." And it was like, for her, even though she wasn't a new teacher, you could see her eyes light up. She was like, "Oh my gosh, that makes me so happy." She was like, "I had people that I planned with at my old school, and I'd love to plan together." And so that was really kind of the start of things turning around for me. I still had challenges.
So you say things turning around. Can you be more specific about like what was going wrong? Or what you perceived was going wrong?
Yeah.
Or was it just your mindset?
I think it was a little bit of both. I did have some management things that were happening. Like I had a couple of really challenging kids, ones that would have meltdowns and And again, I took it personally.
Mhm.
Like, I thought it was something,
Mhm.
and I will say there were things that I could have done differently, but I didn't realize that what the child was going through, and maybe my approach needed to be different with that. But lesson planning, so I student taught in 3rd grade, so I really knew that curriculum, and so just learning the curriculum and planning engaging activities, like she really had some fun ideas to make it more fun for the kids. So, and I just enjoyed the camaraderie. And I will say, we have such a good mentor program now, and I did have a mentor at this school, but it was very much more about the paperwork than actually mentoring, and so I felt like this teacher really mentored me.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What about you? Did you find a buddy?
Well, I had a mentor that was in a completely different wing of the building that I rarely saw, which is why we worked really hard to put our mentors more convenient to our beginning teachers. But I never saw my mentor. But the team teacher, the teacher across the hall that was on my team is who kept me alive and kept me encouraged and kept me afloat during my first year. But I came in October, right before Halloween, and so it was, they were very proud of the fact that they had already ran off about 3 or 4 subs. That was something that they wore like a badge of honor. And so I think there were many kids that were determined to run me off coming in. We always say it's easier to lighten up than to tighten up. So it had been very light when I got there, and then I tried to tighten things up. And I took also, and I will say, I'm glad you mentioned taking things personally, because that was my biggest mistake my first year, is that I was highly offended at a lot of the things that were said and done, and I took it personal, and I thought it was very tied to my identity and who I was. And I wish somebody would have come along and said, hey, they'd do this to anybody in this position. It's not you, and that they're going through all these changes. I didn't understand anything about kids' minds and how they work. I didn't know how to respond to snarky comments, and we need to do an episode on that, by the way. When kids say something that's
How to respond.
Yeah, different ways that you can respond. Teacher comebacks where you can de-escalate. And I was in there just escalating up a storm now. Do you hear me?
Right, and that's one thing you learn.
Right.
You do not argue with children.
Exactly.
No.
And so I was going back and forth with kids like a ping pong, and it was just not good for anybody. It wasn't good for me. It wasn't good for them. But I didn't have any training because I was alternative licensure. So I think that's one of the biggest things I learned, was not to take things personally. And another thing, and I don't know, I guess we can jump around to what we learned, but for me, the biggest mistake that I made besides taking things personally was that I didn't know how to shift gears. And so I had a plan, and it wasn't a good plan a lot of days because I didn't know what I was doing. But I wrote that plan, and I had this mindset like must stick to plan, and the plan would be going down in flames, as I always say. The kids weren't into it, they weren't responding, and I just kept trying to push through.
Which you had worked so hard to plan. And on that same note, for elementary teachers, sometimes we get a little stuck on things being cute and wanting everything to be like fairy tale land. Like, I remember making, I can't even think of an example, but I'd spend like hours at home like cutting out laminated things that really, for the amount of time that I took to laminate and cut, really didn't affect like student outcomes, right? Like, I could have done it in a different way, so sometimes I think I got stuck on the wrong things, like trying to make it too cute. We didn't have teacher pay teacher back then, but just like making things and trying to, and you still have to, but I'm just saying, like, prioritizing
how you spend your time.
Yeah, and really thinking about, okay, what do I want them to learn? Like, it's more about what I want them to learn than what I want them to do. If I know what they need to learn, then I can plan better activities. Instead of starting with the activity. Does that make sense?
And starting with the activity. I think my mindset that first year was like how can I fill this time?
Yeah.
It wasn't like what are my end goals, or I wasn't working from data analysis or anything. I was just trying to it was more like creating a schedule than to achieve learning goals, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, how am I going to get through this hour to keep them busy and keep them occupied? And those are things that you learn as you go. And I always say it's a very complex craft, right? And I didn't even think about engagement. It wasn't on my mind. As long as we had something to do,
right,
I wasn't really aware of their engagement levels. And if they're not engaged, they're going to give you a hard time.
And I think
We
it's
said that all the
important
time.
to say, too, that you cannot do it all your first year.
No.
Like, talking about looking at data and doing all those things. Yes, you have to look at data, and you'll have an instructional coach at your school to help you do those things. But in the beginning, you just really need to focus on the basics, like getting those rules and procedures down, right? Wouldn't you agree? And really having
absolutely.
Standards-based lesson plans.
Yeah. Do you remember, like, specifically one of your challenging kids in that first year?
His name was Chris.
Okay. I was
Yes.
going to say we can protect them.
His name was
We can-
Chris, and I
okay.
remember it's so funny because, like, now in the role that I'm in, like, you definitely see a bigger picture. And I remember we had an admin intern there. I don't remember her name, but I can see exactly what she looks like. And she'd have to come down and get him. And looking back, like, I know a lot of it was me. You know what I mean? And I know she was probably thinking in her head. But yeah, his name was Chris, and he had a really hard life at home. But I was just very frustrated by and inconvenienced by it all. Like, it's how I took it, you know. And so, yeah, I definitely remember Chris. He's the one that sticks out. He was the only little kind of standout child that I had. What about you?
Oh, I had one after another after another. I had a whole bunch of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I taught for 4 sections. I taught 3 sections of ELA, and then they had me teaching science for 1 section, which we were on a 3-man team.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was like the off subject.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was really just trying to fill time in that science block, which now I could just do science vocabulary or whatever. But yeah, I had a lot of interesting behaviors that first year, and I did not succeed with all of them. And one of them in particular I got real upset about. I've told this story before, probably during teacher talks, but I was very upset that I couldn't reach a kid, and my AP had to pull me aside and say, you know, you're not going to be able to save them all. And that wasn't really what I wanted to hear. But he would say, you do the best, you know, that you can possibly do, and then you just have to hope that somebody else will reach them. You know, but I did have success with a whole bunch of other kids that year.
And sometimes I think you don't realize the impact that you've had on students, like in that moment, like maybe later on down the road. I mean, I've had students come back that I didn't really realize, you know, I just thought they were an average student in my class, that I didn't do anything like overly special for them, but they came back later and said that I really had. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think they know.
Yeah, when they're, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of another thing that I did wrong that first year, other than not knowing how to switch gears. I gave in to my emotions too much. I don't know if you experienced that or not. I did get angry a couple of times.
I think my emotions were more at home than they were at school.
Okay.
Yes.
Keep in mind, elementary and middle were very different. Right.
Yeah, but I do remember that feeling right before Christmas, like, oh my gosh, I don't think I can do this anymore. And I would like talk to my parents, and I was more emotional, like at home, like, oh my gosh, what have I done? But I promise, everything turns out okay. And after Christmas, things take a little turn for the better, don't you think?
Yeah. I think my family, I think I brought a lot of it home with me that first year. I think I come home and vented maybe a little bit too much at home.
Yeah. And I'll say, too, on that end, I think some of it stems from, like, you're just so overwhelmed. Like, you're learning the curriculum. You're learning how to manage your students. You're learning all these acronyms. You have all these meetings. Like, it's much more, I think, than you realize. And that going back to that student teaching, like, you see your teacher doing it, but you don't really realize all that it entails. And so just having to have that responsibility. And so on that note, I think one thing I really learned my first year was you could stay until 11 o'clock every single night and still have things to do.
Right. That's true.
And so I just try to take it. I would, and as your first year, you do have to stay later. Do you not agree? And work.
Yeah, and I would say yes. If you never stay late, you will suffer.
Yes, and it's not going to be like that forever. Like, you're not always going to have to do that. But your first year is really, you really do have to put in that extra time and work. But I tried to have at least one day that I stayed late, and I mean till like at least 5, maybe sometimes later. And then I had a couple of days that I would leave early, and then, just trying to get organized in that way really helped me. And then later on, not my first year, but really prioritizing, okay, my list is this long, but what are the most important things that I need to get done today? And really just focusing on marking that off. You know, the things that your principal needs you to do should be at the top of the list.
Yeah.
And even before that, I think the most important thing is you have to be prepared for your students.
Yes.
You have to be. Because if you don't have a plan for them,
they're going to have a plan for you.
Yeah. So just making sure that you are prepared for them that day. Because if you don't have the materials ready, you don't know what you're doing, it's going to be a disaster.
Yes, and I think if you can leave the building ready to go for the next morning, you'll sleep better, you'll enjoy your evening better. That's what I didn't do that my first year, but that's what I arrived at over time. But I will say one other tip that I learned during my first year. One day I was complaining about the kids. I said, they won't stop talking. I'm trying to teach. They won't be quiet, blah, 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 blah. And the teacher across the hall said, just give them work. And I thought, and I was like, what are you talking about? She said, just give them something to do. You know, and it wouldn't dawn on me. I thought I had to teach and teach and teach and teach like the whole time that I was in there. I didn't know about, because I didn't go to school for education, I didn't know about independent practice or guided practice or anything. Sometimes they really do just need something to do. Yeah. You know, like you've got this lesson plan that you wanted, your vision, you know, involves them doing this, that, the other. If they're not into it or they're too wound up for the day, sometimes, hey, you know, getting them to go back to their seat, shifting gears, like I talked about a minute ago, and say, hey, I'm just going to give y'all something to do. No one's being punished. I'm just giving you what you can handle right now.
That's right.
And so I learned how to do that, and that you can't just give them work all day, every day.
We're not advocating for that.
No, but sometimes they need to ground and like just something to keep them busy for a while. And that was not something that I arrived at on my own. I had to learn that. And so you learn. On year 13, I was scratching the surface of what it meant to be effective. I mean, you just learn, and each year it really is better than the one before. Don't you agree?
I absolutely agree. And on that same note, I was just thinking about when you said give them work. Another big mistake I made was I was all about like what I was doing and teaching, and then I'd give them the work, but I hadn't necessarily modeled what I wanted them to do.
I've done that before.
Yeah, and I think it's important for every grade, but good gracious, with a 6-year-old, you better.
Yeah.
So just making for sure that they know what they're doing when you give them the work to work on. Like it's got to be clear, and you have to do that modeling in order for them to be successful, because then you're going to have problems again.
Yes, and I think you can't assume anything. And so I used to just assume, like I always, when I train teachers all the time, don't assume that these kids are going to raise their hand when they want to speak. You know what I mean? Like a lot of teachers just assume that's standard protocol for the public school system, and it's not, because there are veteran teachers out there that let kids call out. You know, so you have to
model what you want them to do.
You have to say what you want, teach it, model it, reinforce it, and sometimes revamp it.
Yeah, for sure.
And but I wasn't doing that my first year either. And then I was also like giving them work that was way over their heads, and I didn't know, I wasn't honed in yet to.
And that's another good point when they're working, really walking around and checking to see how they're doing. Like you might have somebody sitting there doing nothing, or you might have someone that's really doesn't understand and they need some scaffolding. So just all of those things. Yeah, it's like you said, teaching is a complicated craft.
It is very complex. There's a lot of layers to it, and there's always, you got to always remain teachable. And you know, it's amazing. And I don't mean to say this disparagingly, but we do have some really young teachers that think they know a whole lot.
Oh, I mean, I was that way. I mean,
and I was that way too, a little bit. But we gotta stay humble. And I mean, like I still learn things. I go into classrooms all the time, and I'm like, oh, that's a great idea.
Yes.
You know, so I think just staying teachable.
Yes.
And
forever.
Yeah. And then just always being a student. And but what celebrations did you have at the end of your first year?
Oh gosh, well, I mean, I made it through. I learned all the things that we just talked about.
I didn't resign.
Yeah. And I think the awesome thing about your first year is you learn so much. So you like when you're ready to start that second year, because you're like, I know what I'm going to do the same, and I know what I need to do differently. Or maybe I shouldn't say no, but I know something I want to try to see if it's more effective. Yeah, I would say those are my celebrations. And then after my first, so I was in Pitt County for 1 year, and then I came to Harnett County my second year, and I taught third grade at South Harnett. Shout out to South Harnett.
Jeez.
And I just like thrived there. I mean, I think I just learned so much from my first year. Not saying I didn't have some issues there too, but it was just 1,000 times better. So.
Yeah, well, when I see my kids from my first year, like at the food line or whatever, I'm always like, I am so sorry.
I know.
Like, I'm like, because I years later, I was so much better than I was that first year, but they don't ever act like it was horrible. And so I think that's a celebration. Is that, oh, you were fine, whatever. No, they don't recall it being rough.
Yeah.
And my test scores were good my first year. And I did we had the end of grade on the 8th grade reading, and I had growth. And so I thought that was I was really happy because it was so rough some days. Yeah. But we were able to stabilize enough, to get some. So there was evidence of learning. And so I think that's a celebration. And like you, I made it through. I didn't resign. My attendance was pretty good.
And I had fun. I mean, even though there were challenging days, I really did and still do love what I do. And so I think just keeping that in mind too, like it's about the students.
It is.
And
it's definitely about the students.
Yeah. So we hope that today was helpful for you all. It was fun kind of reminiscing about our first years, and we know you're going to have a great year. All of you, even if it's your first, second, third, or beyond. And we just hope you
tune back in to Teacher Talks to Go.
That's right, for our second episode. So that'll be up and so have a good afternoon, everybody.
All right. Thanks for listening.